r/NoSleep. Posted by u/doomedgeek. When I was growing up, my only friends were dead people. Now I am an adult. I wish I could forget about the bullies who made my childhood a misery. But I cannot. Not because of the spiteful things they did, but because of what happened one winter afternoon. I was hiding from the bullies. There was nothing out of the ordinary about that. I had been picked on by a couple of older kids from school for months by that point. It started small, with them tripping me up in the corridor and acting like it was an accident, then slowly built. I would realize people were laughing at me and only find out when I got home that I had a piece of paper with "loser" written on it stuck to my backpack. Once when I rode my bike to school, they pushed me off it, let all the tires down and bent the handlebars. They made sure the rest of the time to sit behind me on the school bus and kept up a constant stream of insults. I was too upset and embarrassed to say anything to my parents or the teachers, and before long I woke up every morning with a stomachache, dreading the day ahead. There was thankfully one thing that made my life better. Before the bullies targeted me, I was already a bit of a loner. I was nervous and did not like new situations. The place I felt most comfortable was a cemetery. It was about 20 minutes walk from school and a bit closer to home. I found it one summer holiday while I was out pretending to be an explorer. By myself, of course. The smell of fresh mown grass was wonderful, and I loved the sight of the flowers placed by some of the graves. I was old enough to know what dying meant, but young enough that the details were vague. I was curious enough to spend that first visit walking around for hours reading names and dates and inscriptions. As I walked home, my imagination was in overdrive as I tried to picture the people who were at rest in the graves. What had they looked like? What had they liked to do? Were they sad before they died? It was fascinating to me. After that I went to the cemetery again and again. There was the headstone of a boy who had died when he was my age that stood out for me. I felt very sorry for him and his parents, and things seemed even worse to me because no flowers were ever left by his grave. The dates on the headstone showed he had died almost 100 years ago, so it was understandable no one visited. The next day I picked some flowers growing by the roadside and propped them against the headstone, then sat on the grass. To keep him company, I guess, even though I knew there was no one really there. After that I kind of adopted a few other people whose gravestones appeared forgotten about. I brought more flowers for them, I sat by them, and I brushed leaves from them as autumn ran its course. I also found myself telling them about my day. I tried to find good things. A high mark I had got for an essay. A new book I was enjoying reading. Sometimes I stood there by one of their graves crying and telling them about the bullies. They were the closest thing I had to friends. On the day I am meaning to tell you about, the bullies had been waiting for me just outside the school gates. I ducked down when I saw them, hiding from them, and crept out another way. My heart was beating 10 to the dozen as I hurried down the street, and I was more pleased than usual to reach the cemetery. I walked along the rows of the graves saying hello. Snow had fallen earlier and I promised to bring a brush with me next time to sweep it up. I was chatting away when I heard muffled laughter behind me. I turned, and my heart sank. It was the bullies. They must have followed me. They pointed at me and called me crazy. "Look at him," they said, talking to himself. I would not explain what I was doing and stood there trying to stare them down, trying not to let them see how scared I was of them. One of them suddenly picked up a rock from the ground. The other grinned. The next thing I knew, the rock was flying through the air towards me and a sharp pain exploded across my forehead. I stumbled backwards, fell. I lay there among the graves blinking, trying to focus. My head was stinging and my face felt wet. I could hear the bullies laughing. Then I felt something tickling my hand. I managed to turn and look at it. I flinched. A long fat bug was crawling over my skin. One at first, then a stream of them. They were emerging from cracks in the ground and soon they were all over me. I wanted to scream but dared not open my mouth in case they crawled in. More bugs appeared from the earth, followed, in one of the cracks, by something dirty white. A different insect, I thought, then saw it was bone. Fingers. A skeletal hand reaching up out of the dirt. Fear trickled through my body and I could only lie there and watch as the rest of it appeared. It dragged itself out of the earth until it was standing over me, its skull pale in the winter light. Beyond it I could see more skeletons rising from the ground, from the graves where they had been held for so long. The first of them now peered down at me, reached out with one long finger bone and touched my forehead. It lifted the bone to its face, seemed to study the crimson drop collected there with its empty sockets, then looked out over the cemetery. I followed its gaze, realized it was staring at the bullies. They stood there, their mouths hanging open in shock. Slowly, the skeleton started to move towards them. Its jaws were moving, as if it was speaking to them, but no sound came out, and to me this silence was more terrifying than any words could have been. The other skeletons followed, closing in on the bullies. They looked at each other once. The faces were drained of color and they looked like they were about to be sick. Then they turned tail and fled. And, as my eyes grew heavy and I started to feel myself drifting away, I realized. What exactly? I am 28 now and married. My wife and I are expecting our first child and we could not be more excited. I am nervous as well, but I will do everything I can to be a strong and loving father. To learn from my own childhood and help my son, or daughter, navigate their way through an at times scary and confusing world. One day, when they are older, I will take them to the cemetery and introduce them to my friends, explain how their father came here when he was growing up, and how this is not a place to feel scared. Will I tell them though, about that winter afternoon, and if I do, what will I say? That the bullies saw blood pouring from my head from a wound they had caused, that I was writhing about on the ground in distress, and so they panicked and fled. And that I saw things that were not real because I was concussed, then fainted and was found by a passerby. Or, that my friends rescued me. They came from their resting places and chased the bullies away. I don't know. I have plenty of time to think about it, and many new and wonderful memories to create on the way. The next story of this video. Posted by you/doomedgeek. I want people to understand that I am a victim, not a freak. I knew if the storm broke, the pain would come, but I had to get out of my apartment. This was a week ago, last Monday. As I hurried down the street, I tried to look like I was one more person going to the store or to meet friends for a drink or maybe heading out for a date. I tried to look like the thing I most wanted to be in the world, ordinary. I have complex regional pain syndrome. When I was a teenager, I suffered serious injuries to both my hands. Injury causes the syndrome to develop, and since then even the slightest touch to the skin of my right hand causes intense pain. It basically feels like my hand is burning. Before I left my apartment, I had checked the weather forecast online in the old-fashioned way, staring out of the window at the sky. An obscuring covering of dark clouds drifted slowly by. It looked like rain. There are of course steps I can take to protect myself. I have a base layer right glove and an outer waterproof one, both were expensive and high-spec. It's not just touch I have to be afraid of though. The rain did begin to fall, and although my skin was physically shielded from it, there was nothing I could do about the change in the temperature that came with the storm breaking. This is another of my triggers because of the syndrome. I winced as the pain kicked in as it became a few degrees cooler, and my right hand began to feel as though it was being dipped in flame. If anyone is reading this, I guess it's fair enough to ask why I had chosen to go out on the eve of a storm? The answer: because I needed my pain meds and I had run out. The only drugs that would truly do the job for me are illegal and addictive. The ones I had been prescribed only fall into the latter category. I don't beat myself up about this. Without the pain meds I would not be able to cope even in the low level of my life as garbage way I do. This is the bottom line as far as I see things. So, there I was, hurrying through the rain on my way to the pharmacy. It was still light out, I was fine for time. It was with a degree of relief that I walked up to the door of the pharmacy, stepped inside. The pharmacy was quiet. I could hear the hum of an aircon and readied myself for the fresh pain the difference in temperature outside and inside would bring. The staff all know me, and quickly, efficiently brought my meds to the counter. I said thank you and turned to leave. I noticed a young man standing by the door. I wondered, had he been watching me as I collected my meds? Paranoia is not a symptom of complex regional pain syndrome, but, what's that old saying? It doesn't mean they're not out to get you. I don't live in a good neighborhood, and as walked I was acutely aware that dusk had crept up on me. I was so fixed on getting my meds I had not kept track of time. Many of the street lamps that should have been coming on were broken. In the ones that worked I could see insects gathering in clusters, the rain glinting. The few other people out were all keeping their eyes firmly on the ground, most had headphones on. People don't come to your aid round here, and I don't blame them. I could hear footsteps behind me. Sweat began to prickle my skin and I gasped as a little trickled down my arm under the protective layer of my gloves and onto the skin of my right hand and brought fresh pain. I glanced around, there were no other people at all now. Just me and my shadow, the man from the pharmacy. I did not dare turn around to check, but I knew in my guts it was him. I was not naive, but I had been stupid. When you take collection of the meds I have, it is advisable to keep the label on the box hidden. Otherwise it is like pollen to the bee. A siren's call. Call it what you will. I did not know the man's story, why he wanted the drugs. Most likely because he was also an addict. Or he knew he could get a good price for them on the street. Either way, I was in trouble. Cold fear rippled through my body. My hands screamed with new pain as my own body temperature changed. I wanted to walk faster, but the more scared I became, the more helpless I felt. I swore to myself. I felt something touch me in the back. A voice behind me said, "Bud, I've got a knife, just give me your gear and this does not have to end badly for you." I swore, so quietly it was more an exhalation than a word. I looked up, at the sky, into the rain, desperately trying to think what to do, when I saw a break in the clouds. A separation, and, in the gap, the light of the moon. I tensed. My entire body felt like it was rippling as it began. As my face twisted, as my skin became a matted tangle, and I turned and bared my fangs at the man who believed moments before that I was easy prey. I didn't tell you what the injuries were to my hands. When I was 16, I fell from my bicycle and impaled my right hand on the spike of an iron gate post. This caused my complex regional pain syndrome. When I was 17, I was bitten on my left hand by a lycanthrope. The man who had tried to steal my meds ran and did not look back. I looked up at the moon, snarled at it, at the power it held over me, then walked home, keeping to the back streets, keeping out of sight. Always out of sight.